Good morning. This webinar offers closed captioning. To enable closed captioning, click on the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen and choose your preferred method. Welcome to the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection webinar. Please note any website or email that I mention will be posted in the chat box. For those seeking business licensing assistance, you can visit the Small Business Center at City Hall on the 8th floor or call 312-74-GO-BIZ, 312-744-6249. Also, business licenses can be applied for or renewed online at chicagobusinessdirect.org. If you are part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, you can get credit for joining this webinar by sending an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. If you want to learn about the program, please visit chicago.gov/business education. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available at youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. I will post the mentioned information in the chat box. We encourage attendees to ask questions. Please use the chat box to send your questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note that the views, information, and opinions expressed during this webinar are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection or the City of Chicago. Today's webinar is Inside the Industry Retail, and this is part of the Inside the Industry webinar series. I will now turn the webinar over to Lisa Slazinska, Director of Public Affairs.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. So today's webinar is going to be interactive and informative. We're going to make it more of a conversation with our two experts here with us today. So we have Taryn Smith, who is the founder and CEO of 37 Oaks. Welcome, Taryn. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
And then also joining us is Robin Fick, Vice President of Research with World Business Chicago. And please welcome Robin. Say a brief hello.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, so we're going to kick things off. Like I mentioned, and my colleague Geraldine mentioned, today's webinar is Inside the Industry Retail. So we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into the retail industry, looking at trends, outlook, outcomes, best ways for you to handle customer service, really getting down into the nitty-gritty of all things retail. And kind of to kick things off, we have Robin, who will share some data points with us. So I now turn it over to Robin.
Great. Thank you. So just to kind of set the stage and why this webinar is so really important at this moment in time, when we look at new business establishments, both in the Chicagoland area and within the city limits, we see that there have been growth in new business establishments. Most of these are small businesses. So within the Chicagoland area, we've seen about 6,000 to 7,000 new businesses established since COVID. Looking in the city, just this year alone, we've seen about 3,700, almost 4,000 probably by now, new businesses established within the city. In 2021, there were 7,000 new businesses established in the city. It's really fabulous growth. So I'm going to dive into some really high level projections for consumer spending growth. That is, what are the retail goods that Chicagoans are expected to spend more money on over the next 5 years? So generally, really quickly, before we start talking about how people spend their money, we want to look at their incomes. And so for Chicago, we see that the current median household income is expected to grow from about $70,000 what it's at now to about $85,000. So that's an $85,000 median household income in Chicago.
I'm not quite sure if, there she is. Okay, you froze for a little bit, Robin. Can you go back? The last thing I caught was talking about the median income.
Yeah, great. I'll repeat that. So the current median household income is expected to grow from about 27,000, or excuse me, from about 70,000 to 85,000. So that's 85,000 median household income by 2027, with the number of households in Chicago remaining fairly steady at about 600,000. So now I'm going to kind of dive into spending for various retail categories, with the top two areas for growth over the next 5 years appear to be spending on food and then entertainment and recreation. So within food, we see spending on food for at-home consumption. So what you would eat at home, these are groceries, will grow by about 1.2 billion. And food consumed away from home, so that's at restaurants or bars, that can even be McDonald's, so fast casual restaurants, will grow by about 900 million by 2027. So to put this in context, we expect to see spending on food by Chicagoans to reach almost 9 billion or 15 billion annually. That's 15 billion annually. The next largest retail segment for growth looks like purchases for TV, audio sound equipment, and computer gaming consoles. This segment, which falls within entertainment and recreation, will grow by about 250 million over the next 5 years. That's also the main driver within entertainment and recreation, which is projected to grow as a whole by about 700 million to reach annual spending amounts of about 5 billion for the entire city of Chicago. To wrap things up, other retail segments where we'll see large growth: clothing and apparel, which includes the drivers there are footwear and women's clothing. And then we're also going to see large growth in furniture and various housekeeping supplies. So if you kind of put this in the broader context, you might conjecture that we may continue to spend more time at home, but we also may want to be well dressed when we do venture out. That kind of concludes the kind of update. Let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. I love that you mentioned getting dressed up to go out. I think we kind of still, for some of us, in that transitional phase of doing a hybrid of at home and coming into the office. And I can only speak for myself, but I do look forward to weekends and dressing up. So I'm probably part of that data point and just helping the economy grow. That's what I'm here for. So before we go into it a little bit more, Robin, I mentioned you're with World Business Chicago. Can you give an overview of World Business Chicago?
Sure. World Business Chicago is a public-private partnership with the city of Chicago. We're the city's economic development arm. We work to answer the question for businesses, why Chicago? I work in the research center, and so we really try to apply a data-driven approach to that. But our overall mission is to drive inclusive, equitable growth for the city of Chicago.
Thank you. And Taryn, I know your work is extremely similar and valuable. Can you speak a little bit about the company, 37 Oaks, and also, your involvement within working with World Business Chicago and other community partners?
Yes, well, so 37 Oaks is a commerce consulting and a commerce development organization. So we really focus on working with small, mostly product-based businesses, and we help them grow in 4 different areas, either through e-commerce, through wholesale, through storefronts, and pop-ups. Those tend to be the 4 ways that these businesses start to grow and start to get their businesses out there and connect with different customers. So the way we do that is by a lot of education. We have a lot of courses that we deliver, a lot of one-on-one coaching, a lot of tools, resources, guides, everything that you could think about to really build that foundation around education. And then we also have an application platform called Saucony, where businesses can have their products on our e-commerce marketplace and kind of cut their teeth on what it's like to start and grow their e-commerce business as well. So we work with a lot of economic development organizations, municipalities, financial institutions, basically these community organizations that are out there to support small businesses. And World Business Chicago is one of them. We really work a lot and value their insights when it comes to research, because we're teaching the education, but we also need their expertise on what to teach, right? Based on where the market is heading. So we've really tapped into their data quite a bit over the past 7 years.
Thank you. And it's the work that both of you guys do that helps entrepreneurs and business owners come through City Hall and then get their business license to get started. So I love the synergy on this webinar we have. But Taryn, when did you realize that there was a need for that kind of consulting business and people needed that extra education? How did your own business kind of come to fruition?
Yeah, great question. My background is actually in corporate retail. So I spent over a decade or so working at the corporate offices of like CVS, 7-Eleven, Sears, these big retail organizations. And my role was a national buyer. So when you're a buyer, you're working with big brands, medium-sized brands, smaller brands, any product that is looking to get on the shelves of these retailers. Well, one of the things that I saw was the big brands, they have the deep pockets, right? They have the departments of marketing and finance and logistics. So they have all of that in-house skill set. But the smaller businesses, although they had amazing products, they didn't know what they didn't know. So getting your products on shelves of national retailers, that's kind of like a trade, or something that you do need to learn the nuances about. It's not something that you just Google or YouTube it and just try to figure it out. Like, there's a lot of nuances to it. And I felt like a lot of that education was needed because it wasn't anywhere out there that was consolidated, that was digestible, that was simple to understand. So that's when about 7 years ago, we opened 37 Oaks to just really be that place for businesses to learn about these things so that they don't encounter a lot of the risks. And they also reduce the learning curve of actually growing into retail or e-commerce storefronts and pop-ups.
And I love that there are resources like 37 Oaks out there for businesses, because often what we hear here at City Hall is, I want my product at CVS, I want my product at Target, and finding, that connection, how to actually break through, make that partnership. It's not an easy task, but we see it pretty often. I love going to these stores and seeing the local section where it's Chicago-based businesses. Love that. But what are your recommendations? Obviously, going to World Business, kind of figuring out the business plan, seeing how you guys can set yourself up successfully to go into these stores. But what are just like a couple, pointers that you could share as to how an entrepreneur can make that connection to a big box retailer?
I would say one of the first things really is education, because if you're working with a big box retailer, they're going to want to have confidence, not only in your product, but in you and in your business overall. So if they're going to work with you, they want to know that you know the ins and outs of this program or this process, because they are relying on you to do what you do so that they can deliver what they're supposed to deliver to their customers. So it's kind of like this synergy and this partnership that needs to happen. So understanding the nuances of selling into wholesale, I think, is really important. The second thing is just overall being patient. It's a process. Like, there's a lot to it, not at all trying to say that to be intimidating or scary, but it is a process, especially when you're trying to get into the bigger box stores. They have systems and processes and costs and things that you just have to learn about. So I always like to encourage the business owners I work with just to be patient. It doesn't necessarily happen overnight, but it does happen. So tapping into your resources, your connections, your networks is a big important part of it too. Tapping into people who would know the buyers or the decision makers, I think, is the other part as well, because it is a relationship business, just like every business is.
Excellent. And Robin, being with World Business Chicago, we kind of think of that organization more at like the global level. But I know you do amazing work at the local level too with small businesses. Do you have any ways that you would be able to help out a local brand getting into a big box retailer? Where's the focus with World Business Chicago on that aspect?
You're right in that we do have a global focus, but we also have the ability to kind of put out some information on what are those dynamics going on right here in Chicago, because we're fundamentally answering the question, why Chicago? And so I think for some of the questions that a small local business might want to understand is some of our resources really point to what are those different dynamics within the neighborhoods, and really understanding, right, when you're looking at consumer spending, what's the appropriate amount of population density for a neighborhood that a big box store is really going to want to understand exactly who their shoppers are and what they're buying. And I think that type of information is what we love to kind of push out and really make available on, hey, here are the trends that you as a small business owner may really want to understand, the difference between placing your business at one intersection versus a different intersection. Those are going to have really different could potentially have different trends. The really great news, I think, about what small businesses would really want to understand is that what we see is that consumer growth or consumer spending growth is actually happening all across Chicago. We're still a very large city. And so people really do have a larger amounts of disposable income because things like our housing are slightly more affordable than other cities. So I think that's something that's really important to understand is there's still a healthy amount of consumer demand, regardless of what neighborhood you're in Chicago. And I think that's something that's lost. So that's what we spend a lot of time talking about is where is the demand? And I think that's something that small businesses really find useful.
So two things I'm hearing is Taryn, education, and then from Robin, do your research, obviously tap into these organizations, but you need to be informed and educated, and then also do research, what products are missing, what stores are missing in a community. So that's something we overhear often here is, I opened up this ice cream shop because there wasn't one within a half-mile radius, so just picking up on these little things and obviously touching in with experts like yourselves, resources like yourselves is extremely helpful, valuable for all of us, who work together, our attendees with us today. I highly recommend reaching out to you guys. Wonderful. So something that, kind of shifting gears a little bit. So we know businesses are still in the process of recovering from the effects of the pandemic. We are very much in the recovery phase and what I hope is more of a stable economy that we're reaching. But what does the data show when it comes to the recovery of small businesses in Chicago specifically? And I'll let both of you touch on that.
I can take that first turn and just kind of lay the groundwork with some data. So what I mentioned at the first part, and yes, you're right, we're still feeling some of the effects of the pandemic, but the promising note is that small businesses are surprisingly resilient. That's not to undermine everything that we've had to deal with through the pandemic. But with the new business establishment growth rate within broader Chicagoland, about 7,000 new business establishments, the same thing for the city, another 7,000. And so that's actually a lot of growth there. I do think what you are kind of seeing is a little bit more sensitivity around pricing for real estate. There are some good opportunities there. A lot of folks maybe changed locations or were able to sublet or didn't need as much space, so they subletted some out. The other pieces are some of the supply chain disruptions that we've heard about, whether that's caused by fuel or by just general, supply chain disruptions. I think that you've seen that happen, and it's taken a little bit longer to see all of those ripples move through. But I think that they are kind of slowly improving on those pieces. But I think those are some challenges.
And I echo absolutely everything that you said. A lot of the courses that we've seen or the topics in one-on-one coaching that we've seen that has mostly been for the businesses that are recovering and trying to dig out from all the impacts of the pandemic tend to be around those areas of pricing, around positioning or repositioning their products, even competition. So to Robin's point, because there's been a major influx of new business owners, that means there's more competition out there, right? So we have to be a little bit more surgical and a little bit more strategic in terms of our marketing efforts, in terms of how we're targeting our customers, in terms of understanding our customers' changing shopping behaviors. So there's a lot of things that we can't take for granted that we knew pre-COVID that applies to our customers. And a lot of businesses are trying to figure that out now. But the good thing is that to the point that both of you have mentioned, that there are a lot more businesses out there. And a lot of us are just trying to figure out and navigate this world of entrepreneurship, but there are a lot of resources to do that. Absolutely.
And I'm glad you mentioned supply chain issues. I think we're still definitely reeling from some of that. In my personal experience right now, trying to go car shopping, which has been not from a customer standpoint, pretty intense, but something that I've heard is, car dealers are maybe not including this kind of feature to offset cost here, but including this kind of feature. Is that something you would recommend for a small business owner? Maybe instead of having a line of like beauty products of 7 products, like narrowing it down to 5 because of supply chain issues, just being able to focus in a little bit more on certain products. What are your recommendations as to how to like shift and adapt a business model to handle supply chain issues?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And funny, we just taught a class on this last night because there's a whole, there's an art and science to when it comes to choosing the type of products that you put out in the market. And I think the science part of it is the part that we want to tap into a little bit more now, just because of what's going on in the industry with supply chain and rising costs and shipping costs. And there's just a lot of things that are forcing businesses to look at their business a little bit more strategically and to focus on the financial element of it. I mean, we should do that all the time, but there's certain times where we have to really focus on that. So when it comes to looking at your product assortment or what you want to put out there, whether it's a service or whether it's a product itself, trying to be as targeted or what they call like rationalize your products as much as possible is probably a good thing to do now, as much as you can leverage I'll say vendors or materials amongst all your products versus trying to have different products and pieces and vendors all across your assortment. That kind of increases your risk a little bit. So the more you can consolidate is important, but then you also have to think about the customer side, right? Because we could try to consolidate and narrow as much as possible, but our customers may not be happy with us when we do that all the time, right? So we kind of got to balance the business side along with the customer experience side. So it is an art and a science, but this is a good time to kind of figure out what that balance is for your business and for your customers.
Robin, do you have anything to add with supply chain issues?
So on that, I actually think there are a couple of really good resources out there that I would add, that I would point people to, because it is there, it changes month by month. So right, something that was relevant 2 months ago has maybe shifted a little bit. The first actually is it's the Institute of Supply Management, and they actually post what's called the Chicago Business Barometer. We include this on our dashboard on our website that we'll provide the link to at the end. But the Business Barometer is a survey of Chicago manufacturers and all of their kind of, business activity. That means how many orders are they getting in? How much are they able to fulfill? And so if you're really talking about how am I going to source some of these products or what's going on, what are those broader dynamics, it gives you a really good sense of, hey, here's what's going on. And they actually do provide some distinct results from that survey. It is used nationally, but it focuses on Chicago manufacturers because there are so many and because we are such a large portion of that. So I think that's number one. Number two, the other piece actually is diving into the census. The census has some really good tools. They have a business builder tool that actually that will have some consumer spending data. It's a little bit older, but it's actually still really relevant because you can map out and see how are things shifting. And you can also just sort of get a general understanding of your consumer base. So how much are people spending on fuel? What are their home costs? Do they own their homes outright free and clear of any mortgage, right? So if you're looking at, establishing a home goods or a repair business, that's going to really give you some insight on what your local consumers need. Those are two really good resources that are free and they're updated pretty frequently. The Chicago Business Barometer comes out every month, and it's going to tell you it's going to give you a good idea on how the local supply chain is functioning.
Thank you so much for sharing that resource. I myself didn't even know that existed, so thank you. Love to hear that. And I think it kind of boils down to obviously consumers, right? Consumer spending, consumer behavior. And we're definitely seeing consumers kind of moving in between online and offline experiences. They're open to retailers, but they like the convenience of online transactions. So what do you have in terms of advice for entrepreneurs that are kind of going back and forth? Do I just do e-commerce or do I plant roots in a neighborhood and open up a brick and mortar? Taryn, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think that's another good question because, as business owners, especially emerging business owners, we don't have all the time and resources in the world. So sometimes we do have to focus. In a perfect world, I would definitely say try to do both. They both serve different roles in your business and in the marketplace. So although there is an overlap, reaching out to your customers through e-commerce is going to be a little bit different than reaching out to them through like a brick and mortar store. So if you could ideally work towards having both in your strategy, that's awesome. I think, there's this statistic that about 85% of total retail sales happen in physical locations, or call it brick and mortar. So even though the growth in e-commerce has been completely like astronomical the past few years, and that's where customers are going, we still have a big percentage of people that want to shop in a physical location. So especially with Chicago, especially as with the data that Robin shared earlier, with there's money in these neighborhoods, right? We have money that we want to spend, especially in the entertainment or recreational type of areas. We want to connect with customers there because that's where they prefer to shop. That's where the 80 to 85% comes into place. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a brick and mortar store. You can do pop-ups and festivals or pop-ins or other type of ways to connect with your customer. So I would probably recommend doing that, just because Chicago has that strong environment to do that. We have the customers, we have the population, we have that here. But at the least, I would also encourage you to have some sort of e-commerce presence as well, whether it's as simple as just selling some products on occasions on Instagram or Facebook. Doesn't necessarily have to be your own full-blown, e-commerce site as well, because there's a lot that goes with that. But if you could break it down to a little like pop-up shops here and there and some Instagram just to start off with, I think that's a good start, and then you can grow from there.
And I'm so glad you did mention pop-ups. So we do actually have a pop-up license that's available at the city of Chicago. So, from the user standpoint, you could find the vacant space and apply for a license to be in there. I'm not sure actually how many months you need to have the space for, but nonetheless, it's an excellent way to kind of test the waters of the neighborhood, your products, almost kind of like a test trial of sorts, right? Should I take this business to the next level? So thank you so much for mentioning that. Robin, anything to add?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to bring some more resources. So there's a website called Opportunity Insights that actually will tell you two pieces of relevant information. The first one, they sort of pull in from Google Mobility where people are spending time. Are they spending time at home, in their workplace, at the grocery store, at retail, at restaurants? And I think to Taryn's point, right, it'll kind of tell you where are they spending their time? And so I think that's actually particularly relevant just to kind of see, right? I can tell you, we're definitely not spending time in the office. It's still down, but where are we going, right? We actually might be going to parks or to grocery stores more often. So I think those are kind of relevant, especially as you think about festivals, right? If there's more trends towards parks, festivals are a part of that, right? So the second piece of data set that's on that website is actually consumer spending in general, but it'll also tell you what types of products, and those are updated weekly. Those are almost real-time data. So it's a very, very, very really kind of niche in terms of real time, right? What actually were people doing last week? And I think that's just going to give you a sense of, hey, should I go into this particular festival, or when is the right time to think about, doing something on Instagram? I think those are really good buttresses to what Taryn has shared in terms of all of the different things that you should think about. How do you make an informed decision? It's a really great resource. It's Opportunity Insights.
Thank you. So we definitely are living in an age of information overload, right? We are on our social media probably more than we would like to admit, and we're bombarded with targeted ads. I know both of you are not necessarily marketing experts, but Taryn, you did mention, selling on Instagram, selling on Facebook, these different e-commerce ways through social media. What recommendations would you have for someone who is considering something like that? Is that a viable route to go down? Social media shops.
Yes. That's a loaded question. I could probably talk about that for a while, so I'll try to narrow it down a bit. But, when you're thinking about e-commerce, you're thinking about selling your products and connecting with customers to sell your products digitally. And I think one of the first things that does come to mind is selling through like Instagram or Facebook and using targeted ads and basically marketing efforts through those platforms, which is really still impactful. You still have, Facebook, I think is still the largest social media site out there relative to the number of users, and Instagram is growing. You have TikTok, you have Pinterest, you have YouTube, like the list goes on. So I think one of the most important things to do is number one, focus, because we can go on and on and on about all of the different social media ways to connect with customers and to sell your products, and it can get overwhelming, and you don't want to spread yourself so thin where you're not being effective. So you probably want to focus on maybe the 1, 2, or 3 channels to focus on. But then also, it's not always only about using like targeted marketing or targeted ads on Facebook and Instagram. We still have like Google ads out there. There's a lot of other platforms like YouTube where you can do promotions. You can do Google Shop. Like there's a lot of other platforms, even old school snail mail, right? I mean, it's not necessarily, digital marketing, but these are some other effective ways to connect with customers from marketing perspective. It could be text messaging, it could be email blasts. Like there's just other things that I think we should consider. It was very, very focused on using like Facebook and Instagram to connect with customers, especially during the pandemic. But now I think with all of the changes and algorithms and privacies and technology that's impacting the effectiveness of those ads, we kind of have to think a little bit bigger. So it's really about focusing, being more strategic, and also understanding the other options that you have.
Absolutely. And I think part of that with the education and research piece is knowing where your consumer is, where your audience is, right? When you say Facebook is still number 1, maybe, you're selling something that's geared towards, more kids, even like where are parents hanging out? Is that Facebook? Is that Instagram? So absolutely, like part of that is knowing where your consumer is located. Robin, anything extra about social media shopping, e-commerce, stuff of that nature?
Yeah, there are actually, if you really want to dive into those pieces, there's actually some metrics that are put out, and I can share some links afterwards that monitor e-commerce purchases, and that's usually comes from the federal government. And so it's going to be broad nationwide. They don't really have it sort of granular to within the city. But again, I would go back to the census and look at, how many households have internet access and are regularly using that? Because we know there is a little bit of a digital divide on that. And so we still see that there's some demand for brick and mortar stores. People want, we all think about why we live in Chicago. We love Chicago because of the variety, but also because it's a walkable city, because in my neighborhood, right, I can get all of these different things. And so people really want that, right? We want to walk down the street and go to an ice cream store. I think that's fair to say. So it's sort of a little bit of a balance. And I would defer, Taryn has some really great advice about understanding, right, all of the different things that you need to think about as a small business owner. So there's some good resources out there. They tend to be national. I would sort of look at internet usage in your community area, but also think about, right, what brick and mortar places are lacking, if any, in that community area, and realize that there's still a strong demand for that particular retail.
Very helpful. Thank you. Taryn, this question's more geared for you. Something that obviously business owners need is capital. What kind of tips do you have, especially for startup business owners, as to how to secure capital, some resources out there, even kind of setting up your business model to pitch to maybe some investors? Just some top 3 things that you could share.
Well, that's a good question, because I think the need for capital, especially startup capital, is going to really vary based on the business and what you need. Like, for example, if you're more on the service side, to start your business, you might just need a laptop and some business cards, right? Because everything's going to be done from a service perspective. But if you are a restaurant, or if you're trying to produce barbecue sauce or make clothes, now you have to invest in inventory or machinery or warehouses or whatever the case is. So your capital needs are going to be a lot more. In the perfect world, if you're able to fund your business through sales, I always say do that first, right? That's the most competitive, most easy way to do it. You're able to use your profits from your business in order to reinvest back in it, and good to go. Sometimes we can't do that, or sometimes we need more than the profits are. The second way I would say to do it is to focus on grants, of course, money that you don't have to pay back. There's a lot of great tools and resources, especially in the city of Chicago, a lot of great organizations that are out there to support businesses through grants. So it does take a little digging, and Robin, you may know some resources that I don't know that kind of consolidate some of this, but if you're able to apply to grants on the government side, or even on the private side, like definitely go for that, because again, typically you don't have to pay it back, or there's very flexible terms. If you're able to, or if you're interested in any type of loans or something like that, there's also many great organizations in the city that are focused on small businesses, that are focused on getting low interest loans. Like they're there to really support small businesses as well. So we have a lot of great resources within the city to tap into. It's just a process, and sometimes you have to research the ones that are the best fit for you. But of all the cities I think that I've just worked in, Chicago really does have a lot of resources for that. So focus on first using profits. If not, then you could go for grants, and then also go for loans.
Thank you. And, as we are in a kind of recovery session over here, we do have the Chicago Recovery Plan that's kind of guiding our recovery efforts here in the city. And on the website, which is chicago.gov/recovery plan, we do have just outline different funding opportunities, which could be grants or loans, but that's updated, I would probably say weekly, of different opportunities for business owners and nonprofits also to apply for. So I'll post that in the chat for those seeking capital that way. And then kind of shifting back to, the success of retail really comes down to consumers, right? And we've kind of, as we see kind of a gap in workforce and brick and mortar locations, how important is it still that customer service aspect within a business model? Whether it's training your employees, like if you can talk a little bit about customer service still, in my opinion, being like the number one thing that, guarantees a returning customer, to be honest. So if there's any tips on how to, strategize a good customer service experience, please share.
Yeah, that's a big deal. It's always been a big deal, but especially now, as we mentioned, there's so much more competition in the marketplace. That's one of the things to consider. So one of the ways that we can actually be a point of difference to our customers and kind of build that loyalty and that repeat customers is through customer service. One of the main reasons why people shop in brick and mortar is because of experience, right? So that experience is pretty broad. It could be based on the visualizations and the visuals of your store, to the customer service, the people that are working there. Like it's pretty broad. So your staff, or the people that are working with you, or you yourself, when you're interacting with businesses or with customers, that is an extension of your brand, right? It's not just, I need to make this transaction. It is an extension of your brand. It's that last final touch point that they're going to have before they leave the store. And you want that to be memorable. You want that to be positive. So if you don't invest in that training, if you don't invest in that education for whoever is going to be interacting with that customer, that could be a negative touch point that the customer has. And because they have so many options, they don't necessarily have to come back and, shop with you. And if you've taken any of our classes, we talk a lot about the value of repeat customers. They're more profitable for us, right? So we want to get people to come in, but we want to get them to come back. And if they don't have that good customer service, they're probably not going to do that. So we do have to look at that training, that education, not just on the technologies in the store, but on how to greet people, how to look, how to take care of yourself, how to smile. Like those type of things are very important, because they mean a lot more than sometimes I think we think they do.
Absolutely. And especially with online shopping, you're not going to have an employee greet you and say hello and make sure they can find your size for you. So thank you. Robin, do you have anything to add, whether it's on your expert level or even anecdotally as the consumer yourself?
Yeah, no, I actually really love going into a store. There are certain things that I only buy in person. There are some things I can buy online, but I go in person because I want to see and touch and feel and yes. So I think on that, my suggestion would be to, if we think broadly about the availability of workforce, we do see that, there are still some, because of shifts in our consumer patterns, there are still some folks who need employment. And I actually would suggest that there are a lot of really great workforce programs that are working to kind of retrain and reskill folks that exists either in a workforce program or in city colleges. So when you're looking for folks how do I staff up my store, there actually are a really broad range, whether it's the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership that has various programs, or even just going to your nearby city college to see what they may offer. Some of them have specific programs for, let's say, food service. I think those are, or culinary service. Those can be resources for you. There are folks out there, we've heard a lot about the Great Resignation and how competitive it is, but there are still folks out there who are looking for jobs. So I would just sort of suggest to find some of those resources if you're struggling to find the right folks for your staff.
Thank you. I've always admired people who can like purchase a candle online without like smelling it. I'm like, very risky move, but I admire that like boldness. It says vanilla spice, and I'm just going to assume that's what it is. Hold on one second here. Something I want to touch on is, as business owners, you're kind of a one-stop shop yourself, right? You're, especially in the beginning stages, doing the accounting, the HR, seeking legal assistance as well. What do you recommend for retail business owners to do kind of for like their mental health side? If you have any like personal recommendations or something as to kind of take that step back and maybe take off the hat of business owner to take care of themselves as well.
That's important to your point, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed in entrepreneurship because you are wearing all those hats. And I think because a lot of the business owners I'll say I work with, their business could be their sole form of income. So sometimes taking a break gives them a sense of feeling guilty, because it's like, oh, I need to, get this business going. I need to invest in it. I have to bring in the income so I could pay for my rent and everything else. And I totally get that. So sometimes you may not be able to take a full vacation like you would like to, but even if you're able to incorporate just moments of just quiet, it may not be a long time, but just moments where you just kind of just stabilize or shut down. It could be 5, 10, 15 moments. There's a lot of breathing exercises. I know some people may say, oh, breathing exercises, I don't know about that, but they do actually work. So sometimes if we're not able to really take advantage of full retreats or vacations, we have to steal those moments in our day or our week just to stabilize, because it can be very overwhelming. So that would probably be one of the main things I would do for like mental health. But then on top of that, don't be afraid to ask for help, right? Like tap into your networks, tap into these resources. Oftentimes a lot of people are willing to help. Sometimes we just don't ask. So if you're able to tap into your resources, your community, your friends, other business owners, they could sometimes offer some form of support.
Robin, do you have any tips yourself that maybe you've been using?
Yeah, I'm not a small business owner, but I think, especially after being at home and everything that the pandemic brought, we all sort of need a vacation. I think you see that a lot. If you use some of the data sources that I dropped in the chat, you'll see that people are actually spending almost double the amount of time at parks. So everybody's sort of feeling the need to unplug and recharge. And I think that that's just really wise advice to kind of take a moment and enjoy, and not to sort of be, hey, Chicago's the greatest city, but we all know it is, in that we've really got a lot to offer here, right? Whether you want to just peruse, a book fair, or kind of a festival, or just hang out at a beach, or go to a park, right? Or take a hike in the forest preserves. There's a lot of opportunities. That's my favorite way. And so I really just try to take advantage of what Chicago has to offer on that.
I know that was a slight segue, but I think a very important one, as we're seeing all the stresses, and as business owners, even more so. So I just wanted to share a little bit of advice for, what business owners can do to make sure, making yourself a priority, in turn, making your business a priority. We spend a lot of time talking about businesses and entrepreneurs from like the startup aspect. But you know, at what point do you think a business owner should consider opening up a second location or kind of expanding their business to maybe a new product line? Like, what would be that kind of, you know, temperature check for someone to do and take that leap of faith to keep going?
I think one of the biggest indicators is going to be around your financials, your P&L statement, your profit and loss statement, your income statement, whatever you want to call it, is financially going to be able to tell you if you should. Of course, we may want to, because we just may want to, but our numbers are going to have to back that up. So if you're at the point where you're making the profit and you're making the sales, but then on the other side, you're seeing the demand. So especially when it comes to a brick and mortar store, it's not just about seeing the demand, but are you seeing the demand within about within about 5 miles of that brick and mortar store? So a lot of the data that, let's say, Robin was talking about and having access to, it's not just about, are more people asking for your product? It's like, where are they? You might have a little bit more flexibility if you're thinking about expanding a product line through e-commerce or something, so it's not as geographically based. But for a brick and mortar store, you have to make sure you have that at least built up demand or something around that location, because if not, then you'll have to invest more time and energy and resources to build that up, and that could take time.
Robin, any tips for business expansion?
Yeah, I think it goes back to Taryn's point of really kind of understanding the consumer habits, but also where, especially if it is geographic, you know, a brick and mortar place, where you're wanting to expand and understanding that additional demand, right? Will it support that? I would also suggest, you know, you can go back to some of the resources that I've shared, but also even taking a look at the city data portal, which is one of my favorite. I can't believe I haven't mentioned it yet, but the city data portal will actually tell you who is open, you know, the new business licenses. So, right. So where are new businesses going? And you can kind of get a sense on what's coming up. You're looking at a corridor, right? What's kind of going on? What am I going to expect in this corridor as you're seeing things kind of grow and shift and move? So I think that's actually another really good resource, is to just see what's going on in a second area that I haven't touched on before, aside, in addition to consumer demand, but also what are other businesses doing in that particular area that can also be helpful.
Well, thank you. So now we are going to open it up for questions from our attendees. For those joining us over in the chat box, you can type in your question and we'll go through them. One question is, do you need a business license to qualify for a pop-up shop license? If you have a business license, do you need a pop-up license if you are selling goods via a vendor table at an event? So something mentioned in the beginning was our small business center here at City Hall. We are staffed with business consultants that actually walk you through the entire licensing process. So I highly suggest coming down to City Hall, or there's also a business assistance phone number, and I will put that in the chat. And they will make sure you are getting the right business license so you still stay compliant. And then thank you, Robin, for putting a bunch of those links in the chat. We have a question about, I need help in getting capital for my business. I can't seem to find grants for my business. I have a transportation business. Well, I think grants for transportation businesses do exist. I think it is very much a niche. So what I do suggest is you can send an email over to us at bcpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. I'll put that in the chat, and we can connect you to some neighborhood business development centers that focus on that, and even manufacturing side, just finding that industry section for transportation. So never hesitate to reach out to us. Let's see. I think that's all the questions that we currently have. If anyone does want to put in a question in the chat box. In the meantime, Taryn and Robin, let's just wrap up with maybe like the top 3 things you recommend for retailers to consider in this current economy state, whether they want to start up or whether they're expanding, just 3 things for them to consider.
So The first thing I would say is to consider is having at least some sort of physical presence, like we were talking about, whether it's through pop-ups or a storefront, or even selling your products through wholesale. But then also having some sort of e-commerce presence, whether that's through social commerce or your own site or a marketplace, whatever the case is, there's value in having both of them for your business. And I think you learn a lot from each of those platforms to help you grow more strategically. So that's one of the things I would say is number one. The second thing is data, right? This is so important, especially if you're trying to transition your business from, let's say, being in a hobby phase to like growth. You have to have data. I know sometimes numbers could be a little intimidating, and the calculations of it and what does it mean and the insights, but there are a lot of resources out there that can support, but we're not going to be able to grow strategically if we don't have the numbers behind it. And then the third thing is just to be patient with yourself. Give yourself some grace. Entrepreneurship is a journey. That's why they call it an entrepreneurial journey. And it does require a lot from us, but there are so many ways to also be successful through it. We just have to have grace with ourselves. So take a moment and breathe, walk through one of those many parks that Robin was talking about that people are going to, the natural preserves and all those things, just to kind of decompress, but definitely stay focused, but try to just relax a little bit if you can.
Great advice, Robin.
Yeah, to build off the data, I would say do your research. That's the first one. I think for research, though, I would understand the big national trends, right? What's going on, right? What's going on with the supply chain? What's going on with interest rates? Know those things, but also try to think about drilling down to the micro level. Know what's going on in your community, what's going on around you. I would actually also, for the second thing, do a little bit of, kind of flip on that, is that data is really important and you should start with the research, but also so are the anecdotal interactions. So if you're looking at a commercial corridor, take a walk through it, spend some time there, talk to people, network, right? There's the data. It's always going to be imperfect, right? You're going to need to balance that with, understanding the actual real life interactions, scenarios, right? What's going on in the corridor? What's the traffic like on the corridor? Talk to other entrepreneurs, reach out to folks like Tarandon, right? Involve yourself in some classes. That's the second thing. And then really kind of the third and final thing would just be, understand that I am actually an autodidact on data. And so giving yourself, as Taryn noted, that grace to learn, teach yourself that it is actually a journey and no one person has all the right answers. So that give yourself that patience and that grace to say, I'm going to embark on something new. I've got a lot to learn, and just hopefully you'll enjoy that journey.
I'm glad you touched on, networking and connecting. I think, we so often think that we're now living more in the technological era and, less connection is just fine, but we are humans and we will always create human interaction. So never outrule that. We did actually get a couple questions come through. So one question is, and both of these are very industry specific. First one is, are there any tips regarding opening a laundromat business, including retailing products needed as far as detergent and bags? So more of a service-based business, but still products within it.
Well, I think from, I don't know specifically about like the laundromat business itself, but if I looked at it as just a brick and mortar, or at least one element as a brick and mortar, that location is going to be very important, finding that right location. So again, to Robin's information or resources that she put out there, especially in Chicago, specifically for Chicago, on traffic and demographics and understanding who your customer is, but finding the right location for that. And also looking at other competitors in that area, because you just gotta, you don't want to be right next to another laundromat. So you kind of got to consider all those factors. But I'd say from that perspective, it's still a retail location. So looking at that location is going to be very critical to the success of your business.
Thank you. Robin?
Yeah, I actually think I'm trying to think of some data sources. Again, actually, believe it or not, I'm going to go and point you back to the census. I think one area that I would start off is understanding who owns a home and who rents. And if you think that's going to help you tell the difference on your consumer, who your target consumers, whether you're a laundromat, right? Or if you are trying to provide a service, right? what kind of homeowners, right? If people are living in high-rise buildings that maybe don't have in-unit laundry, if that's the type of service you're trying to provide, or if you want to target, different types of homeowners who may or may not, who may need a specialized laundry service, right? They have a washing machine, but I would point you towards the census on those pieces as a first swag of understanding those different housing situations of your target consumer.
Great point there. And also just a small plug for neighborhood business development centers. Those are your chambers of commerce in communities. They also have a lot of research, a lot of data, a lot of know-it-all about the community, and they could also point you out to maybe best location, and some resources too, even partnering with other chamber members on things. So never outrule a chamber of commerce as well. And then we have another question. And once again, this is a little bit more industry specific, and touching in about marketing. So maybe we could do this a little bit at more of the high level. But this person is in the process of opening up a second location after 15 years. They've narrowed down their customer, their product, and they're thinking of doing some old school traditional marketing, if you will, of having people outside and do samples. They do chocolates, so maybe some chocolate samples, having a stand at events, maybe even engaging a PR firm doing social media ads. So what kind of suggestions would you have for them, especially for a second location, on how to get the word out?
I think one thing to do is to leverage your first location. You probably have some loyal customers or people that are, in your current location. How can you leverage them to help spread the word as well? Especially those people that are like advocates, right? Or your top customers, your VIP customers. They're like your ambassadors for your brand. So how can you get them to help you spread the word? But I think you're headed down the right track of having a mix of, call it old school marketing plus new school digital marketing. Flyers and mailers and sampling and those type of things still work. They tend to be a little bit more interactive, which I think sometimes people miss, so they can gravitate towards that. But then you still have the more digital side of it. As much as you can utilize your email list, if you have one, or if you have a text messaging list or campaign, like just utilize that as well, because that'll help you get the word out. But I think you're on the right track with mixing kind of old school and new school, because that'll help to give you more visibility.
Absolutely. I was going to say, you kind of already have your customer base right there, sending them an email. You'd be sometimes even surprised, right? Where you may have customers coming from the other side of the city to your current location. You open up over there, they're like, actually, this one's closer to me. This works even better. So absolutely tapping into your already customer base. Robin, anything extra to add?
I do actually, and this is a little, this is kind of getting a little off, not off topic, but very niche. So there is a website called Placer AI, and that is a subscription data source. And I'm not suggesting that you go and buy data on this because it's costly, but they actually do offer some really interesting foot traffic data for free. That's just kind of, you can sort of play around with and see, and that may actually be helpful. And I would just go back and encourage, there are really a lot of quasi-free, meaning you don't get the whole data set, but you get kind of enough to make a little bit of an informed decision. Free data sources out there through a Google search. Really don't hesitate to try to find that. But Placer AI kind of just looks at, because we all have our computers in our pockets now, they're tracking your mobile phones. And so they kind of can say, hey, here are the average visitors in a particular location. And so if you are trying to do something outside and want to understand foot traffic, they do make some data available for some locations. It may or may not work for your specific location, but that's just one place to try. And I would encourage folks to, explore data sources like that are a little bit, they're very niche, actually.
Robin, our data guru on this panel. And thank you so much for putting in all those resource links in the chat. And we'll wrap up with this final question. What are things to look for to secure diversity and inclusion is at the top of minds for a new business venture? I'll have both of you take a stab at answering it. Taryn, if you want to begin.
Yeah, I think one of the things to ensure that diversity and inclusion is top of the minds. A lot of it is just education. I mean, at least from my perspective, I think the more we all understand the importance of diversity and inclusion, and also the business impact it could have. I know we're talking specifically here about businesses and small business owners, but there is an impact that this could definitely have on your business. And sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. So that's where the educational part comes into it. But the more that we can educate people on having that diversity, and not only just the diversity, but helping to include them into the culture, the diverse perspectives into the culture of the company, so that you can make more diverse decisions that could then target more diverse audiences, I think is going to be helpful. So it starts with really with education and just having an open mind and understanding that this does have a business impact.
Absolutely. And I'm not trying to plug any sort of institution or anything, but I do know Loyola University does have a DEI program, different courses and a certificate. So, you know, that's truly something important within your business model. I would highly recommend exploring those kind of options too, to kind of support the education around it. Robin?
Yeah, I would actually kind of note that, right, there's the external DEI of your customers, and then there's internally, right, how your DEI practices within your staff. But I would also note, to Trent's point on there's a business impact, that, you know, on the South and West sides in particular, there are communities that have been underserved for a long time. And there actually really is a business case to be made that there is a business need there. And so I think that that's a really great opportunity to sort of think about what communities are we serving, and that there actually is consumer demand there that is often overlooked. And so that is both can be a business model, but it's also serving a DEI purpose, that communities, when you look at them across the city, everyone needs grocery stores, and we see that there is demand for grocery stores evenly distributed across the city. And so those are kind of things that there's a business case for being more DEI focused.
It was I think, an excellent place to wrap up. I want to thank both of you for joining us today. A beautiful Friday morning with our coffee in hand, getting us through. Thank you so much. And as we wrap up, if both of you could share one more time how people can reach you, and maybe put it in the chat as well, contact information, website, all of that.
Yes, absolutely. And also thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to be a part of any of the BACP webinars. So 37 Oaks, you can reach us at 37oaks.com. We have a slew of resources, and there's just a slew of stuff, if that's an official or professional word that I could use. So just slew. So go to 37oaks.com and I'll put that in the chat. And then you could follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at 37 Oaks. So I do look forward to maybe connecting with a few of you all as well.
Thank you. And Robin?
Yeah, so you can go to worldbusinesschicago.com. That's worldbusinesschicago.com. All of our contact information is available there, as well as some of the resources that we put out. So we have a dashboard that will give you a broader sense of the economic conditions in Chicago, but also we do have a strong presence on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out via LinkedIn to both World Business Chicago and me, and that's the best place. worldbusinesschicago.com. I'll drop it in the chat.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us as well. And everyone have a wonderful day and happy shopping. Thank you all.